The healer's chamber smells of cedar smoke and white briar. It is a scent Hannah once found comforting, back when the Ironbane stronghold was still new to her, back when she still believed that the life she was building inside its stone walls was one she would someday feel at home in. Before she learned that certain smells can become the smell of enduring, of surviving, of being someone's ornament while pretending it is an honor. She is 3 hours past, bringing her son into the world. 14 hours of labor. 14 hours with only the healer, Dravel Grimfang, and old Mira, the one woman who stayed the entire time, who held Hannah's hand through the worst of it, and never once said it would be over soon, because Myra was too honest for false comfort. 14 hours, and Alpha King Liam Ironbane, her husband, her mate, her lord. They had sent word that he was occupied with visiting Alliance lords. He would come when he could. He arrived 9 minutes after the baby was born. He held the child once, carefully, with the particular tenderness of a man performing tenderness in front of witnesses. He pressed a kiss to Hannah's forehead, light as a leaf landing, said she looked strong, and left before the healer had finished cleaning up. Now the room is quiet. Dravel has gone to rest. Mira has been dismissed. The candles burn low and amber in their iron holders, and Hannah lies on the narrow bed with her son pressed to her chest, and the room is so quiet it feels like being forgotten. In Hannah's experience, quiet and forgetting have always lived very close to each other. She was told to rest. She cannot rest. Her body is still trembling. That deep, involuntary trembling that has nothing to do with cold, that belongs entirely to a woman who has just done something enormous and has not been held since. She looks at her son's face. He is dark-haired and small, and his eyes, when he opens them, are a steady, serious grey, the colour of river water before a storm. She has not named him yet. Not officially. Not in the way Ironbane tradition requires. She shifts carefully, slowly, and sits up. 1 cup of water. That is all she wants. 1 cup of water from the basin at the end of the corridor. 1 breath of air that does not smell like effort and grief dressed up as ceremony. And then she will lie back down and rest the way she was told. She places her son in the woven cradle beside the bed. She tucks the blanket around him. She stands. Her feet are bare on the cold stone floor. And the cold is real, and real is what she needs right now. She walks toward the corridor. She hears him before she rounds the corner. Liam's voice, low and unhurried, the voice of a man who has already put the difficult part of his evening behind him. She has heard him use that voice in council chambers, in alliance meetings, in every room where he needed to seem settled and certain. She knows exactly what it means when he sounds that way. It means he is comfortable. It means he feels no threat. It means he is somewhere he has decided is safe. She almost calls out to him. She is 3 hours postpartum, still bleeding, still shaking, and she almost calls out to her husband because even now, even with everything she has quietly noticed over 3 years, she still wants to believe the story she has been telling herself, that things will change, that he simply needs time, that she simply needs to be patient. She does not call out, because that is when she hears the other voice, Zyra Shadowclaw, warm-voiced, even at a whisper, settled in the way of a woman who has long since stopped wondering whether she belongs in a particular room. And then she hears Liam's words, spoken without hesitation, without lowering his voice, with the ease of something believed so long it has stopped feeling like a secret. I just want to come home to you, Zyra. You are my true family. You always have been. Hannah's hand finds the wall. The stone is cold beneath her palm. She presses into it. Real. Solid. It holds her weight without asking anything in return, and right now that is exactly the kind of honesty she needs. While everything else goes soft and strange. The amber light of the corridor lamps, the sound of her own breathing, the distant sound of a newborn sleeping in a room where his mother is no longer standing. She waits. She waits for Liam to lower his voice, to add a caveat, to say something that makes what she has just heard make a different kind of sense. He does not. She turns around. One step, then another. Her bare feet make no sound on the stone. She does not run. She does not cry. She walks back the way she came, careful and deliberate, the way a woman walks when she has decided not to fall apart in a corridor. Because falling apart in corridors requires witnesses, and witnesses require explanations, and she is not ready to explain anything to anyone yet. She reaches the room. She lifts her son from the cradle and holds him against her chest. He stirs but does not cry. She looks at his face for a long, long time. Something inside her, something that had been bending toward hope for 3 years, the way a plant bends toward a window it cannot reach, goes very, very still. Not broken. Still. The way a forest goes quiet before something begins to move through it. She does not cry. She is past that particular form of release. Alpha King Liam Ironbane believes his Luna is resting. He has no idea that the most deliberate thing in his stronghold just opened its eyes. Hannah had loved him before she understood what love cost. She had met Liam Ironbane when she was 21, and he was 24, at the border summit between Ashfang and Ironbane territories. She had been there as her father's representative. Her father was ill, and no one else in the Ashfang line could read a treaty map with the precision he required. Hannah could. She sat at the long stone table in the neutral hall at Silverhowl and read the boundary markers out loud, and Liam, across the table, watched her with the particular attention of someone encountering something unexpected. They spoke alone for an hour after the summit closed. Then another hour. He asked her what she thought about the Eastern Ridge provision, and she told him plainly, without softening it, that it favored Ironbane by 3 leagues, and the Ashfang representatives would notice eventually and resent it. He went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Good. Tell me what else I have missed." And she had told him. And he had listened. She married him 18 months later. She left the Ashfang estate, the old stone cottage on the river, the rose briars climbing the south wall, the smell of the eastern fields in autumn, and came to live inside the Ironbane stronghold. She told herself she was not leaving home. She was building one. She was young enough to believe the difference was real. For a time it was. In the first year, Liam brought her into everything. Council discussions, alliance strategy, the complex web of pack relationships that kept Ironbane's power stable. He would find her after late meetings, still carrying the scent of council chamber smoke, and sit beside her on the window ledge of their room and ask what she had noticed, what she thought, what she would have said if she had been sitting at that table instead of behind it. He listened the same way he had at the summit. Would like what she said was the point, not the sound of her voice. She had been so sure then that they were building something equal. The second year began the way seasons change, not with a single dramatic storm, but with a long, slow shift that you cannot name while it is happening. He stopped asking for her analysis in the same way. Her suggestions, when she offered them, were absorbed into his thinking without being attributed. The alliance letters she spent whole evenings drafting were sent under his seal alone, her handwriting invisible beneath his authority. She told herself she understood. He was the Alpha King. The documents had to carry his name. That was simply how the pack world worked. She adjusted. She adjusted again in the 3rd year, when her access to the stronghold's domestic accounts was quietly reduced to a smaller household allowance. She adjusted when the council members began looking at Liam when they spoke, even when they were responding to something Hannah had said. She adjusted when she began to notice that Zyra Shadowclaw, who had been Liam's administrative liaison since before the marriage, had begun to take meals in rooms Hannah had always considered private. She had been calling the feeling adjustment for so long, it had become her native language. Now, lying in the healer's bed with her son on her chest, she let herself look at all of it, without the softening lens of love for the first time, and she understood that what she had been doing was not adjusting. She had been slowly, carefully, was obediently making herself smaller so that someone else's life could be larger. And it had taken 3 years and 1 corridor and 9 words spoken in the dark for her to stop calling that anything except what it was. She looked at her son's face. He looked back at her with those steady grey eyes, already patient, already watching. "I am going to need a little time," she said softly. "Not to the room, not to the air, to him. But I am going to fix this." She did not explain what she meant by this. She was not yet fully sure herself. She only knew that the thing she had been carrying alone for 3 years had just grown too heavy to carry in the same direction. A direction had to change. She looked at her son, and the direction changed. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the amber candlelight with Kyle pressed against her, and she let herself think, not frantically, not in the panicked, spinning way of a woman who has just had the ground removed, but slowly, carefully, the way she had always thought, working through a problem from its edges toward its center. She thought about her mother's estate. She thought about the old Ashfang law scrolls she had read on long winter evenings before she married, half out of longing, half out of scholarly habit. She thought about a provision she had copied out 5 months ago in her leather journal, telling herself it was curiosity. She understood now that it had not been curiosity. She had been preparing without knowing she was preparing. The body knows things the heart is not ready to say. She reached for the leather journal on the small table beside the bed, the one Liam had never once asked about in 3 years of marriage, not once, and she opened it to a clean page. She picked up the quill. Her hand was steadier than she expected. She wrote the date at the top of the page, and then she began to write. Not feelings, not grief, names, dates, facts, every removed document, every meeting she had shaped with no credit, every account access that had been quietly reduced, every letter in her handwriting that had been sent under his name alone. The first entry was short, but her hand did not shake. And that was enough for now. The morning came the way mornings always do after the worst nights, indifferently, without ceremony, the light simply arriving through the high stone windows, whether or not anyone was ready for it. Liam stopped at her doorway before his first council meeting. He did not come inside. He stood in the frame, dressed and composed, his alpha's seal on his collar, a man with a full schedule already arranged in his mind. He looked at Kyle in the cradle with a warmth that was genuine on its surface. It was always genuine on its surface. That was what made it so difficult to name. And then he looked at Hannah and said she looked well. He hoped she had rested. He would check in later if the day allowed. He left before she could form a response. She listened to his footsteps on the stone floor until they faded. Then she looked at the ceiling. The day allows, she thought. Not I will make it allow. Not nothing matters more today than this. The day, as though the day were a separate entity making its own choices, and he simply a passenger inside it. She had stopped thinking of small things like that over the past 3 years, because thinking about them led to feelings she had nowhere to put. Now she let herself think. She let herself see each thing clearly, one at a time, the way you inventory a room before you leave it. The alliance letters had started in the 2nd month of their marriage. There had been a boundary dispute with Silverhowl territory, a complicated one, involving an old water rights provision that neither Liam's advisors nor the Silverhowl representatives could untangle cleanly. Hannah had read the original provision in her father's archived documents before the wedding. She sat down one evening with the relevant scrolls and wrote Liam a clear analysis, 3 pages, with the exact language needed to satisfy both packs, for he had read it, nodded, and taken it to his scribe Vaedric Darkfang to be formatted for official correspondence. Her name did not appear on the final document. She had told herself she understood. The document carried his authority. That was simply how it worked. The Silverhowl Treaty was followed by the Black Fang Alliance letter, the Dread Fang Supply Correspondence, the Raven Fang Border Agreement. She drafted them all. She researched, she structured, she chose the language carefully, the exact calibration between firmness and respect that made powerful packs feel honored rather than managed. Vaedric formatted them. Liam sealed them. Hannah's name existed nowhere in the official record, though her thinking was in every line. 3 years of invisible fingerprints. She moved her mind to the household accounts. That 18 months into the marriage, her access had been reduced. Not eliminated. A small allowance remained, enough for personal expenses and some domestic supplies. But the broader household management authority she had quietly built, the staffing decisions, the seasonal provisions, the crisis supply protocols she had written after the first hard winter, had been absorbed into Liam's administrative structure without ceremony. One morning, the access was smaller. No conversation accompanied the change. She had asked Vaedric Darkfang about it, gently. He had said it was a routine administrative consolidation. She had said, "I see," in the voice she had been practicing, the one that sounds like agreement. She thought about the council meetings, or the way questions had gradually redirected toward Liam, even when she was standing directly beside him. The day, 14 months ago, when 2 ranked warriors, Torvex Ravenfang and Kairoth Bloodhowl, had stood at the stronghold gate and referred to her, in low voices they believed were private, as a decorative presence. She had been on the other side of the stone arch, 6 feet away, still as water. They had not seen her. She had carried those words home in her body like a splinter she could not reach. She had not told Liam. She had adjusted. Now Kyle was in the cradle making small sounds, and Hannah sat in the healer's bed with her leather journal open and her quill moving steadily, and she was no longer adjusting. She was counting. She was building a record, not from emotion, not from a need to be believed, but because a record was what you needed when you walked into a room to be heard by people who had no reason to simply take your word for it. She wrote for 2 hours. By the time Dravel Grimfang arrived with the morning tray, Hannah had filled 4 pages. Dates, names, documents. The pattern they formed when you laid them out in order was clear, and it was damning, and it was composed entirely of things Liam had chosen to do. "How are you feeling?" Dravel asked, setting the tray down. "Clear," Hannah said. Dravel looked at her for a moment, with the particular attention of someone who has spent a long time in rooms where people say one thing and mean another. Then she nodded, set out the food, and left without asking more. Hannah ate. She fed Kyle. She wrote. In the afternoon, when the stronghold was quiet and Liam was deep in his 2nd round of meetings, she sent one message, not to her husband, not to his advisors, not to anyone inside the Ironbane stronghold. The message went to Orvella Grimfang, elder lawkeeper of the Allied Pack Council, who served no single alpha, and who had, 2 days after Kyle's birth, sent Hannah a brief, handwritten note that had no elaborate preamble. It simply said, "When you are ready, I am here." Hannah had not known, when she received that note, that she would need it so soon. She wrote back a single line, "I believe I am ready." Then she closed her journal, closed her eyes, and breathed slowly for several minutes. She was not panicking. She was not drowning. She was a woman with a plan that was beginning, at last, to take its final shape. And the shape was clearer and more solid than she had expected, because she had been preparing for it, quietly, without admitting it to herself, for much longer than she knew. Her son made a soft sound in the cradle. She picked him up and held him, and his weight was real, and she was ready. 10 days after the birth, Liam came to the healer's wing alone. He carried a plate of food she hadn't asked for, and he wore the expression she had come to know as his careful expression, not cold, not unkind, carefully warm, the warmth of a man who has rehearsed a conversation long enough that he is confident in its shape. He sat across from her in the chair Mira used to use, set the plate down, and looked at her with that patient, practiced concern in his eyes. "You seem tired," he said. "I gave birth 10 days ago," Hannah said. He accepted that with a slight nod. "Reasonable." "Of course." He then reached into the fold of his council coat and placed a folded document on the table between them. He slid it across with 2 fingers, gently, the way you offer something to someone you have decided to be generous toward. "I have been thinking about your well-being," he said. "The stronghold is demanding. The pressure of daily stronghold life, especially for a new mother. I want you to be able to recover properly." Hannah looked at the document without touching it. She read it from where it sat. Her eyes moved across every line, the formal heading, the provisions, the numbers in the allowance column, the location of the outer lodge, the duration of the recommended stay, the administrative signature at the bottom. Vedric Darkfang's hand, not Liam's. The kind of document that gets drafted before the conversation it accompanies, which means the decision had already been made before he carried that plate of food through the door. She looked up at Liam. She looked at him the way she used to look at him when she was still trying to understand him. Fully, without armor, with the same open patience she had brought to every complicated document she had ever untangled. She saw a man who was not cruel, a man who had told himself a story in which this was kindness. She saw the specific shape of a man who had made small, selfish choices for long enough that he had stopped feeling them as choices at all. She saw someone who needed her gone. "The outer lodge," she said, "alone, with the baby." "With full support," he said. "Staff, supplies, everything you need, and my household account access." Something flickered in his expression. Brief, gone before it was fully there. "We can arrange a relocation allowance. The administrative transition will—" "Liam." She said his name quietly, without heat. Just his name. "You want me gone? I want you recovered," he said. She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she looked back down at the document. She said, in a voice that carried the shape of agreement and nothing else, "Of course." He heard the shape. He did not hear the absence of anything inside it. He stayed another few minutes, warm, composed, explaining the lodge's amenities in the gentle tone of a man delivering a gift. Then he left. His footsteps faded down the corridor with the particular ease of someone who believes a difficult thing has been handled. Hannah waited until the sound was completely gone. Then she stood, moved to the narrow wardrobe in the corner, and began to pack. Not dramatically, not with the frantic energy of a woman making a visible statement, careful, methodical, the way she did everything that mattered. Kyle essentials, the soft wool wrapping, the small cedar-carved charm her mother had sent after the birth, the medical notes Dravel had written for the first 10 days. Her own things, the dark blue dress that had belonged to her mother, the 2 journals, the quill kit, the satchel she had been quietly filling for the past week. The satchel. This was what she had been building since that first night in the healer's bed. Every day for 10 days, while Kyle slept and the stronghold moved through its routines, Hannah had been copying documents, as alliance letters in her own handwriting, council correspondence she had drafted and passed to Vedrick for Liam's seal, financial records showing the account access reductions, each with a date attached. Every paper that carried her invisible fingerprints, now visible in the satchel she was placing beside the door. She also copied the document Liam had just left on the table, the Lunar Wellness Relocation Order, word for word, with the date and Vedrick Darkfang's administrative signature, and added it to the satchel. Because a postpartum relocation order, issued 72 hours after the household accounts had been reduced, framed as care by the man who issued it, was not simply a painful, personal moment. Placed beside everything else in that satchel, in chronological order, it was something Orvella Grimfang had a specific legal term for. Hannah knew the term. She had looked it up. She lifted Kyle carefully and settled him against her shoulder. He was warm and small and impossibly solid, and he made a sound like he was deciding whether to be bothered by the movement and then deciding not to be. His mother's son. She picked up the satchel with her free hand. She sent one message to Thyra Silverhowl, her childhood friend, the only person inside this world she trusted without reservation. The message was short. Meet me at the eastern postern gate. 1 hour. Bring nothing obvious. Then she walked out of the healer's wing. Not through the main corridor, not past the council chambers, through the back passage that ran along the lower storage rooms, the one the kitchen staff used before dawn, not the one Hannah had learned in her first year at the stronghold, because she had made it a habit to learn the paths no one thought important. She had always believed that knowing the quiet ways out of a place was simply practical. Now she was right about that, in a more specific way than she had ever intended. The eastern postern gate was set into the old stone of the outer wall. In spring, the climbing briar grew so thick across it that from a distance it looked like part of the wall itself. Thyra was there before her, wrapped in a travelling cloak, her red-gold hair pinned under a plain hood. She looked at Hannah, really looked, the way people look when they are prepared to absorb whatever they see without flinching. And then she looked at Kyle, and then she looked at the satchel. "Are you all right?" Thyra asked. "I will be," Hannah said. Well, Thyra nodded once, the nod of someone who has asked what they needed to ask and received what they needed to receive. Then she pulled the gate open, and they walked through. Behind them, the Ironbane stronghold stood exactly as it always had. In front of them, the road to Ashfang land ran east through the trees, and the trees were just beginning to show their first spring leaves, pale and green, and completely indifferent to the political arrangements of anyone who walked beneath them. Hannah walked. She did not look back. The Ashfang estate had been empty for 2 years. It was a stone cottage, small, cold when Hannah arrived, furnished with the scattered remnants of someone else's long-ago life. A borrowed crib that Thyra had arranged through a cousin. A kitchen that smelled of old wood smoke and dried herbs. And a window on the east wall that caught the morning light in a long, slow band across the stone floor, and when Hannah saw that band of light on her first morning, she stood very still for a moment, because it was the same light that had crossed her bedroom floor in the years before she married. The same angle, the same color, the same patient way of arriving. She had forgotten about that light. She slept more than 4 consecutive hours for the first time since the birth. When she woke, the light had moved, and Cale was making small sounds of displeasure at being hungry, and Thyra was in the kitchen producing tea from supplies she had brought without being asked. Hannah sat up, and her body still ached in the deep, whole-body way of someone who had done something enormous recently. But the ache was honest. It was the ache of real effort, not the ache of something being slowly squeezed from you without your permission. She could tell the difference now that she was away from the thing causing the second kind. "Orvella is coming the day after tomorrow," Hannah said, settling Kyle. "I know," Thyra said from the kitchen. "She sent word. Said to tell you to eat." "She sent word already?" "She sent word the same evening you sent her yours." Thyra appeared in the doorway with 2 cups, her expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been waiting for a certain thing to happen and is very glad it has. She is not surprised, Hannah. She has been watching Ironbane from the outside for a while. Hannah held that thought, turning it over. Orvella Grimfang had built her life watching from the outside. 40 years of service to the Allied Pack Council, were never allied with any single alpha, never under any pack's particular thumb. She had seen arrangements like Hannah's before. She had told Hannah so in the note she'd sent. "When you are ready." Not if. When. Thyra set the tea down and sat across from her. For a while they didn't speak, the kind of silence that only exists between 2 people who have known each other long enough that silence is its own form of company. "I found the Ashfang naming provision," Hannah said after a while. "The one in the old law scrolls." Thyra looked up. A mother's naming, spoken in her bloodline tongue before a moon witness, carries prior spiritual authority. Hannah kept her voice level. "I named him. 3 days after the birth, before Liam made any arrangements for a ceremony." Thyra was quiet for a moment. "That makes the stronghold ceremony." "Ceremonial," Hannah said, "not foundational." She paused. "His name is Kyle. It means a beginning that belongs to no one else." Thyra set down her cup. She looked at Hannah with eyes that were bright and serious and warm all at once. Then she said, "Good," in a voice that was very quiet and meant a great many things at once. Hannah ate. She walked. She slept. Orvella Grimfang arrived on the second morning, precisely when she said she would, with a large satchel of scrolls and the unhurried energy of a woman who has been looking forward to a particular conversation for some time. She was in her late 60s, small-framed, grey-haired, with the kind of sharp, dark eyes that made you instinctively organize your thoughts before speaking. She did not offer warmth before business. She was simply clear, though which was its own form of respect. They sat at the cottage table. Kyle slept in the cradle Thera had wedged beside the window. Outside, the river ran over its stones with the particular sound of water that has somewhere to be. Hannah spread her documents on the table. She laid them in chronological order, 3 years of dates and names and records, the alliance letters in her handwriting, the financial access reductions, each with a date, the council correspondence she had drafted without credit, the relocation order, dated, signed by Vedric Darkfang, issued 72 hours after the latest account reduction. She did not organize them dramatically. She simply laid them out, one after another, the way you lay out a map when you want someone to see the terrain. Orvella looked at each one. She did not rush. She moved through the documents slowly, reading fully, occasionally making a small note in the margin of her own scroll. When she reached the relocation order, she was quiet for a longer moment than the others. "The timing," Orvella said. "Yes," Hannah said. "The household account reduction was 3 days before this. 2 days before. I have the administrative notice. It carries a date stamp." Orvella set the relocation order down and looked at Hannah directly. "Do you understand what this is, placed in this sequence?" "I believe I do," Hannah said, "but I would like to hear you say it." Orvella's expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but the thing a smile becomes in someone who has learned to keep their face professional. "This," she said, tapping the document, "is not a wellness provision. Not in this sequence. Was account access reduced? Birth occurs. 72 hours later, a relocation order, issued to a postpartum woman, in a document your husband drafted before the conversation, in which he presented it as spontaneous care." She paused. "This is a documented pattern of financial removal, followed by physical removal. It has a legal name, and in front of the Allied Pack Council, it is not a personal grievance. It is a case." The river ran outside. Kyle made a small sound in the cradle. Hannah breathed. "I would like to file a formal petition," she said. "I know," Orvella said. "I brought the forms." They worked until the light changed. When the papers were spread and organized, and Orvella had marked every point that required additional documentation, Hannah stood and stretched and walked to the window. The river was catching the last of the afternoon light, silver at the edges and deep amber in the middle where the water moved fastest. She heard a knock at the door. Thyra, who had been sitting in the far corner pretending not to listen while very clearly listening, went to answer it. Hannah turned. In the doorway stood a man she had not seen in 3 years. Tall, simply dressed, the plain clothes of a border wolf. Nothing decorative, nothing that announced itself. Dark-haired, steady-eyed, with the particular quality of someone whose stillness is not absence, but a kind of attention. He was holding a small clay jar. "Zorath," Hannah said, her mother's cousin's son. The easternmost Ashfang, the one who had stayed on the borderland when everyone else moved. "I heard you had come home," he said. His voice was straightforward. No performance in it. "The eastern holdings get cold quickly. I thought you might want something warm." He held up the jar. "Dark amber honey, from the East Bank hives." He did not ask why she was there. He did not ask about the stronghold, or the documents spread on the table behind her, or the satchel still sitting by the door. He simply offered, and waited, and left the offer's weight entirely in her hands. Hannah crossed the room and took the jar. It was warm from being carried close, and heavier than it looked. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He looked at Cale for a moment, quick, quiet, the look of someone who understands that a sleeping child is something you observe without disturbing. Then he looked back at Hannah. "If you need anything on the east side, send word. I am not far." He turned and walked back down the path without waiting for her response. Hannah stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him go. She felt something she did not have a name for yet. Something small and new, not urgent, not pressing. Like a door standing open that she had not noticed before, letting in a different quality of light. She filed it in the part of her mind reserved for things that are not immediate, but are worth remembering. Then she went back inside, set the honey on the kitchen shelf, and returned to the table where Orvella was waiting. There was still work to do. Liam expected Hannah at the lodge by evening. She did not arrive. He told himself there had been a delay. The roads, the baby, some small logistical complication easily resolved. He waited until the dinner hour, Then he sent Vaedric Darkfang to inquire at the lodge. Vaedric returned with nothing. The lodge was empty. The staff had received no one. Liam sat in his study and was still for a long time. His first instinct was to send wolves. He suppressed it, not because the instinct was wrong, but because sending wolves to locate a missing Luna required an explanation, and explanations were not something he was prepared to give. He was Alpha King Liam Ironbane. He did not lose things. He did not misplace people. He certainly did not allow his pack to see that his Luna had walked out of his stronghold 3 hours after signing a wellness relocation document he had presented as a gift. He sent Vaedric instead, quietly, through informal channels. Pack contacts in the surrounding territories received carefully worded messages, concern, not alarm. Why a Luna in recovery. Perhaps she had chosen a different location for her rest. If anyone saw her, would they please send word to the Alpha? Purely as a wellness check. The replies came back, polite and warm and completely empty. No one had seen her. The warmth of those replies had a new quality. Deliberate, careful, the warmth of people who were choosing each word before they committed to it. Liam felt it, but could not name it, because naming it would require acknowledging what it meant. He had always been good at not acknowledging things that were inconvenient. Meanwhile, in the private suite that had gradually become understood as hers, Zyra Shadowclaw was conducting her own quiet calculation. She had been Liam's administrative liaison for 4 years before the marriage. She understood power the way a practical woman understands anything, clearly, without sentiment, in terms of what it produces and what it requires. She had stayed close to Liam because he produced stability, status, access. Those things were worth the complexity that came with them. She had no particular cruelty toward Hannah. She had simply assessed the situation and determined that Hannah was manageable, and managed things did not require much consideration. Now the pack members who had previously sought her favor were being careful, cordially warm, attentive in the surface-level way, but not investing, not the way people invest in someone they are planning to be near for a long time. Zyra knew the difference between warmth that costs nothing and warmth that means something. She had always known it. It was one of her sharpest skills. She heard the word unstable twice in conversations she was not supposed to be near. Not cruel gossip, measured, considered, the kind of language people use when they are assessing something they might need to distance themselves from. Both times it referred to Ironbane leadership. Neither time specified which aspect. That evening, she found Kelric Darkfang, Liam's law advisor, not to be confused with Vaedric the scribe, exiting the document archive with a look on his face that she had never seen there before. Kelric Darkfang was one of the most composed men she had ever known. His face never did anything it had not been told to do. His face was doing something now, something tight and private, the expression of a man working through a problem he had not yet solved. She did not stop him. She simply noted it. That night, Dashi opened her correspondence box, the private one, the one with the contacts in Frostbane territory, in Bloodhowl lands, in the neutral settlement near the Eastern Ridge, and began, without making any announcements, to see what was still open. In his study, Liam called Kelric in. He was direct. He was always direct when things felt unclear. Directness was the armor he reached for when patience wore thin. "Find her," he said, quietly. "I want to know where she is within 2 days." Kelric's expression was very composed. "Of course," he said. He did not tell Liam what he had begun to suspect, that several questions had appeared in Allied Pack Council correspondence about Ironbane's alliance record-keeping practices. Not accusations. Questions. the kind of careful, informally worded inquiries that represented something much more organized than casual curiosity. Kelrick could not identify the source. He had checked every contact, every correspondent, every name in the Council's recent outreach. Nothing traced back to a point of origin he could pinpoint. The origin was somewhere he did not have access to. He was beginning to understand what that meant. He left Liam's study, walked to the archive, and began pulling 3 years of Alliance correspondence. By the time he had worked through the first year of records, he had found the pattern. The handwriting in the original draft letters, before they were reformatted by Vedrick's scribe work, was consistent across every document. Consistent, meticulous, and not Liam's. It was smaller, more precise, with the particular letter formations of someone educated in the old Ashfang scholarly tradition. He sat for a long time with the letters spread before him. He had worked for Liam Ironbane for 6 years. He was a careful man, a thorough man, a man who believed deeply in the formal structures of pack law. He looked at those letters, and he looked at the council correspondence questions sitting in his own file, and he began to understand that the silence surrounding Hannah's absence was not the silence of a lost woman. He had been in this profession long enough to know the difference. He closed the archive carefully and walked back to his office to begin preparing for something he had not been asked to prepare for yet. A 3rd day passed, then a 4th. On the 5th day, Liam received a formal communication from the Allied Pack Council. But it was not a summons, not yet. It was a notice of inquiry regarding the authorship and attribution practices of Ironbane's formal Alliance correspondence over the preceding 3 years, requesting the Alpha's participation in a preliminary review. Liam read the notice 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. He had spent 5 days looking for Hannah, and it had not occurred to him, not once, in 5 days, to look at the direction she had already been moving for 3 years. He had seen her as present, as his, as someone who had adjusted to the shape of his life and found a place inside it. He was beginning to understand that a woman who has been quietly documenting and preparing for months looks very different from the outside than she looks from the inside. He was beginning to understand this too late. The Allied Pack Council's neutral hall sat in the heart of Silverhowl territory. It was a long, pale stone room, built by the founders of the Allied Council 200 years ago, deliberately designed to belong to no single pack and favor no single alpha. The walls were plain, the benches were plain. The great table at the front was dark wood, old and scarred with the marks of 100 past proceedings. No banners, no crests, no signals of rank beyond the formal robes of the council elders themselves. You came into that room on the weight of your case alone. Hannah arrived first. She wore her mother's dark blue dress. No jewelry, not the Luna's traditional amber pieces, not the Ironbane crest stones she had been given at the mating ceremony, but nothing that declared who she was through someone else's authority. She carried the leather satchel in one hand, and Kyle, sleeping, warm, wrapped in plain wool, held close with the other. Orvella Grimfang walked beside her. Thyra Silverhowl was in the gallery. The council chamber was already partially full. Representatives from 6 of the 8 allied packs, 3 senior council elders in their formal grey, and at the end of the observer's bench, Zorath Ashfang, who had appeared that morning at the cottage door, said nothing except, "I thought you might want someone from your bloodline in the room." And when Hannah had looked at him, she had said yes, with the simple certainty of someone who does not have to think about whether a thing is true. Liam entered 15 minutes after Hannah. He came with Vedrick Darkfang and Kelrick Darkfang flanking him, the scribe and the law advisor, his two most visible supports. He was dressed with full alpha formality, the Ironbane crest prominent at his collar, everything about his appearance announcing his rank and authority. He walked to his side of the great table with the bearing of a man who has been in formal proceedings before and knows how to carry the room. He looked at Hannah when he entered. Something recalibrated behind his eyes. She did not look like a woman in recovery. She did not look like a woman who was lost or diminished or overwhelmed. She looked settled. She looked like someone who had arrived somewhere and found it to be exactly what she expected. He had not planned for that. Ceolric beside him noticed the same thing and said nothing. Elder Thiric Moonclaw, the council head, a tall, silver-bearded wolf of 70 years who had chaired more formal proceedings than he could count, called the room to order. He was not warm, and he was not cold. He was the clearest possible version of impartial, and in this room, that was the most powerful thing a person could be. Orvella presented Hannah's case. She did not raise her voice once. She did not use a single word of emotional appeal. She laid the timeline on the table the way you lay out a map, factually, clearly, with each point connecting logically to the next. 3 years of formal alliance correspondence in Hannah's handwriting, attributed publicly to Liam. Council records she had initiated and authored, filtered through Vaedric's formatting and Liam's seal. Their household account access reduced over 3 years in documented stages, each reduction with its administrative date, and then the birth. The account reduction, complete this time, not partial, dated 2 days after Ceol's arrival. The wellness relocation order, dated 72 hours after that. She placed each document face up on the table. She named each one. She did not say this was cruel. She did not say this was wrong. She let the sequence speak, and the sequence was clear enough that no one in that room needed it annotated. Liam's legal presentation, which Ceolric had assembled with genuine skill, focused on his title, his financial standing, his long-standing presence in Ironbane territory, his status as Alpha King, and Kyle's bloodline claim to Ironbane leadership. All of it was true. All of it was well presented. Ceolric was very good at his work. None of it addressed the documents on the other side of the table. Then Hannah stood. She did not speak about Zyra Shadowclaw. Not once. That name did not cross her lips in that room. She did not speak about the words she had heard in the corridor, did not mention the 13 letters Liam had never sent her, did not catalogue any of the private griefs that were hers and hers alone to carry. She left all of that outside the door. She spoke about Ceol's morning routine, the walks along the Ashfang River at dawn, the baby wrapped against her chest while the light came in over the water, the pediatric visits she had arranged and attended alone. She had the appointment records, each one signed by the healer. The sleeping and feeding schedules she had established in the first 2 weeks are documented in the journal she kept for him, the cedar-carved charm her mother had sent that hung above his cradle. The way he had, in his 3rd week, developed the habit of pressing one small fist against his cheek when he was settling into sleep, a gesture so particular, so entirely his own, that it made her chest ache with something she did not have a word for, the small, specific, documented reality of a mother who had been present every single day. The room did not need the contrast between her testimony and Liam's legal team's emphasis on titles and finances explained. It simply existed, and it shifted the room, the way tides shift, not dramatically, not with noise, but completely. And once the room had shifted, it did not shift back. Elder Thiric Moonclaw looked between Liam and Hannah for a long moment. His face was impossible to read, which meant he was thinking carefully, which meant he had already made his decision and was reviewing it one final time to be certain. He turned to his two fellow elders. A brief, low exchange. Then he turned back. The Allied Pack Council has reviewed the documentation presented in this proceeding, he said, in the measured, level voice of a man who has made 100 rulings and understands that the moment before a ruling lands is the most important moment to be still. The pattern of administrative removal, financial reduction, and forced relocation documented herein, irrespective of the intent with which those actions were taken, represents a systematic reduction of a Luna's rightful standing within her pack. The petition of Hannah Ashfang is recognized. He paused. The primary guardianship of the heir Kale is awarded to Hannah Ashfang, in her capacity as mother and member of the Ashfang bloodline, with her son's primary residence on ancestral Ashfang land. Alpha King Liam Ironbane is granted supervised council-mediated visitation rights to be conducted in accordance with terms established by this council and reviewed quarterly. Outstanding inquiry matters regarding the formal authorship of Ironbane Alliance correspondence will proceed separately. This ruling is final. The gavel landed. The sound of it travelled to every corner of that pale stone room and settled there, solid and certain, the way only true things settle. Hannah closed her eyes for one moment. 3 years. 3 years of invisible work, of quiet documentation, of mornings spent at a cottage table with Orvella and her scrolls, of nights spent in the healer's room, writing by candlelight while her son slept. 3 years of staying calm when she wanted to burn something down, of speaking carefully when she wanted to scream, of moving slowly when every part of her wanted to run. All of it landing exactly where it was always aimed. She opened her eyes. Kyle was awake, looking at her with his steady grey gaze. She pressed her lips to his forehead. "We are safe," she told him, without words. "We are home." The chamber doors settled closed behind the last of the council elders. Hannah was in the outer corridor, quiet, pale stone, the fading sound of formal proceedings giving way to the ordinary sounds of a building returning to itself. She was adjusting Kyle in the sling, her satchel on her shoulder, her mind already beginning to move through what came next, when she heard Liam's footsteps behind her. She did not turn immediately. She knew his walk. She had known it for 3 years, the particular way it landed on stone floors. He stopped a few feet away. She turned. He looked at her the way a man looks when something he cannot undo has finally become fully visible to him. Not angry, not defensive. Something quieter and more complicated than either. The expression of someone standing in a room they thought they knew, and realizing the walls are in completely different places than they assumed. "You planned this," he said. His voice was not accusatory. It was the voice of someone learning something. Hannah looked at him. She held his gaze with the same clear, level eyes she had brought to every document, every meeting, every conversation in that room. The eyes of a woman who has nothing left to perform, nothing left to manage, nothing left to be careful about, in the specific way of someone protecting something that is no longer in danger. "I planned to survive," she said quietly. "That is what I do." He opened his mouth. She was already turning. She walked past him, her son's warmth against her chest, her satchel firm on her shoulder, and she did not look back. Not because she was performing indifference. She was not interested in performance anymore, but because there was nothing behind her that required her attention. Everything that required her attention was in front of her. She heard him stop in the corridor. She heard the sound of a man who does not know what to do with his hands. She kept walking. The ruling arrived at the cottage on an ordinary morning. Not with ceremony. Not with a formal procession or a sealed delivery, or any of the elaborate signaling that pack politics usually dressed important things in. It arrived in a small folded message, Orvella's handwriting, slipped under the door sometime before dawn. Hannah found it when she rose to feed Kale, the morning still grey at the window, the river audible from inside. She read it by the light of the single candle she had carried from the bedroom. She read it once. She read it again. She stood at the window with Kyle on her hip, awake now, watching her face with his serious grey eyes. And the morning light was beginning its slow, unhurried arrival across the stone floor. Silver at first, at the very edge where the darkness was retreating, then pale gold, then the particular colour between them that has no clean name, or the colour that belongs only to the first 10 minutes of a day before the world has had a chance to complicate it. She did not shout. She did not press her hands to her face, or collapse, or perform the triumph she felt as something external. She simply exhaled, slow, complete, all the way down, the way she hadn't been able to exhale in 3 years, the way a body breathes when it stops bracing. She pressed her forehead gently against Kyle's. "We are safe," she whispered. His name, she thought again. Kyle, a beginning that belongs to no one else. And for the first time, the name felt fully settled. Not a wish. A fact. In the Ironbane stronghold, somewhere in that pale stone building that still smelled of cedar smoke and ceremony, Liam sat at his desk with the same ruling in his hands. He read it. He read it again. He set it down on the surface of the desk he had sat behind for 10 years, in the study where he had made every decision that had led him to this morning, and he was very still for a long time. He reached for the communication stone that connected to Zyra's private correspondence channel, the one no one else in the stronghold knew about, the one they had used through the entire 3 years of his marriage. The call did not connect. He tried again. On the 3rd attempt, a message arrived. Brief, clean, written in the direct, efficient language of a woman who has made a clear decision and sees no reason to embellish it. She had accepted an administrative position in Frostbane territory. She wished him well in his proceedings. She was sure he would manage. That was all. No apology. No backward glance, or no acknowledgement of what he had said to her in that corridor. "You are my true family. You always have been," or what those words had cost him. She had never signed on for the cost. She had signed on for the position, and when the position became complicated, she had made the rational calculation. She was gone. Liam sat alone in his study with the ruling on the desk and the communication stone silent in his hand, and he understood, in the full, unmanaged, unmediated way he had been avoiding for 3 years, exactly what he had exchanged everything for, and what the exchange had produced. He sat there for a very long time. No one came to the door. The morning moved on without him. At the cottage, Heir Silverhowl arrived that afternoon, carrying enough food to supply a small celebration and the kind of cheerful noise that the cottage had been needing since Hannah arrived. She came through the door talking, set everything on the kitchen table, took Kyle from Hannah's arms with the practiced ease of someone who has been practicing in her mind since before she arrived, and then sat in the chair by the window and looked at Hannah with eyes that were warm and bright and completely honest. They talked for hours, not about the hearing, not about Liam, not about documents or council rulings or the careful architecture of the past 3 months. They talked about small things, a memory from the summer they were 12, when Thyra had dared Hannah to jump from the old bridge into the Ashfang River, and Hannah had done it without hesitation, and then pretended afterward she'd planned to all along. The way Kyle's ears moved when he was listening to something, which they had decided, meant he was going to be opinionated. The name of the best cheese sold at the Eastern Market, and whether it was worth the walk. At some point, Hannah laughed, genuinely, fully, without watching herself to see what she was allowing out. The laugh surprised her. It arrived before she decided to let it, which was the best possible way for something to arrive. Thyra looked at her over Kyle's sleeping head and smiled the slow, satisfied smile of someone who has been patient a long time and is finally seeing what they waited for. "There you are," Thyra said softly. Hannah looked back at her. Something in her chest, something that had been held very carefully for 3 years, released its grip. "There I am," she thought. "Here I am." The next morning, before the light had fully found the floor, there was a knock at the door. Zorath stood on the path outside. He was carrying nothing, just himself, steady, unhurried, present in the way of someone who takes up exactly the space they occupy, and no more. He looked at her with an expression that made no demands, which was, she had come to realize over these past weeks, one of the rarest qualities a person could have. "I know a stretch of river on the east bank," he said. "Better morning light there. Fewer rocks at the edge. Easier walking with the baby." He paused. "I thought you might like company, if you were planning to walk." He said it simply, without layering it with more weight than it held, without the performance of casualness that people use when they want to seem as if they don't care about the answer, while clearly caring very much. He simply offered. He left the weight of the offer exactly where it belonged, in her hands. Hannah looked at him. She assessed him the way she had always assessed things that mattered. Slowly, carefully, from the edges toward the center, without rushing. She thought about the honey he had brought the first evening, warm from being carried close. The way he had appeared at the council chamber because he thought she might want someone from her bloodline in the room, and had not made that into anything except what it was. The way he waited in conversation without filling silence. The way he placed himself between the wind and Kyle on the path to the cottage without announcing it. The instinctive, unconsidered quality of someone who protects things because it is simply what you do, not because anyone is watching. She thought about what it had felt like to be in a room with someone who needed her to be smaller. She thought about what it felt like, standing in this doorway, being offered something that required nothing from her in return. She went back inside. She settled Kale into the sling against her chest. She pulled her coat from the hook by the door. The old wool one, her mother's, worn soft at the elbows. She came back to the doorway. "All right," she said, and stepped outside. They walked at her pace, which was the pace of someone carrying a sleeping child, and not in any hurry to arrive at a particular destination. The river was to their left, running silver and clear over its stones, the sound of it steady and clean, the way water always sounds when it has a direction and knows it. The trees along the east bank were further into their spring leaves than the ones near the cottage, fuller, softer, the pale green of early growth, deepening toward the green of something that has decided to stay. Zorath walked beside her. He did not ask about the hearing. He did not ask about Liam, or the stronghold, or the council ruling, or how she was managing, or whether she needed anything, or any of the questions that people ask when they want to feel helpful, but are really asking for reassurance that everything is going to be fine so they can stop worrying. He simply walked. After a while, he said, "What does his name mean?" Hannah looked at Kyle's sleeping face in the sling, the dark hair, the small hand pressed to his cheek in his sleeping habit, the absolute, trustful weight of him against her chest. "A beginning that belongs to no one else," she said. Zorath was quiet for several steps. The river ran. A bird called from somewhere in the east bank trees, once, and was answered from farther away. "That is a good name," Zorath said. Nothing more. He did not expand it, did not ask the question behind it, did not try to do anything with it except receive it. The words settled between them without needing to go anywhere, which was exactly the right place for them. Hannah noticed, without making anything of it, the way he had stepped slightly closer to her side as the path narrowed along the bank, not into her space, not pressing, just present in a way that meant the wind from the east was not reaching Kyle directly. She noticed the way he moved without announcing his movements. She noticed that she hadn't once, in the week since she arrived at the cottage, felt the particular tensing in her chest she used to feel when someone entered a room, the automatic, exhausting alertness of someone who has learned to read the weather in a person's face before they finish crossing the threshold. She did not feel that now. She felt instead the sound of the river, the weight of her son, the morning air, cold and clean and completely indifferent to what had happened in the past 3 years, arriving fresh and new, the same way it always arrived, whether or not anyone had been ready for it. She felt the solid ground under her feet. Later, when Kyle had woken and grown curious about the world, and Zorath had crouched down to show him a smooth river stone with the patient interest of a man who has decided that whatever a baby finds interesting is worth finding interesting, Hannah stood at the river's edge and let herself look back at the full shape of the past 3 years. She saw the woman who had stood in a dim corridor 3 hours after giving birth, hand flat against cold stone, waiting for 9 words to be taken back. She saw the woman who had copied documents by candlelight, of the woman who had said of course in a voice that carried no agreement in it, to a man who had never learned to listen for the difference. She did not feel contempt for that woman. Loving someone fully and genuinely is not a mistake. What she had done wrong was not the love. It was the waiting, the long, patient, faithful waiting for someone to choose her back when every small removal over 3 years had already answered that question. She had loved well. She had been willing to do the work. The problem had never been her capacity for it. The problem had been the direction she was pouring it. She was done pouring in directions that returned nothing. She heard Zorath say something quiet to Kyle. She couldn't hear the words over the river, only the tone of them, low and gentle and completely unguarded. And she heard Kyle make the small, but emphatic sound he made when something pleased him. She turned back toward them. Zorath looked up. He met her eyes across the 10 feet of riverbank between them, with a look that was not complicated. Not layered with calculation or expectation or the particular pointed meaning of someone trying to communicate something without saying it. It was a simple look, the look of someone who is where they chose to be, and is fine with that, and is asking nothing about where they go from here. She walked back to them. She picked up her son and held him against her chest, and his warm weight was real and solid and completely, perfectly her own. She looked at the river. She looked at the morning, which had fully arrived now, all its light present and steady and asking nothing. Or she thought, this is what it feels like when you stop waiting to be chosen and simply choose. The ground under her feet was Ashfang ground, her bloodline's ground, her mother's ground, the ground her son would grow up knowing the smell of rain-wet stone and river grass, and the particular sweetness of the East Bank hives in spring. It was not a stronghold. It did not come with a title or a seal or a place at a formal table. It came with morning light through a stone window, and a river that had somewhere to be and the simple, undecorated fact of belonging. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was, Hannah thought, standing at the edge of her ancestral land, with her son pressed to her chest, and the sun fully in and the river steady at her side. It was exactly what she was supposed to have, not because someone had given it to her, but because she had found her way back to it. And this time she was staying. Hannah Ashfang didn't leave because she was weak. She left because she was done being invisible in a life she had built with her own hands. She didn't plan her escape out of revenge. She planned it out of love, love for the child in her arms, love for the woman she used to be before she made herself small, love for the ground that still remembered her name. And that is the thing about a woman who has been quietly paying attention for a long time. When she finally moves, she moves with everything she has gathered. And what she has gathered is usually more than anyone expected. If you are still here, thank you. From the bottom of this channel's heart. Thank you. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about women who find their way back to themselves, subscribe and stay close. There is always more. Take care of yourselves. We will see you in the next one.